Hi, Kevin Ledoux, the Pragmatic Luthier. There's a question, I think, that enters the minds of a lot of builders, even real experienced builders sometimes. Um, how many jigs and fixtures and tools do you need to build a guitar? And there's a whole lot of answers to that. I don't want to get into a whole lot of philosophy here, but my reason for approaching this video in this particular way is because I designed a new guitar body just in the last couple of days. Here it is, just there it is on paper. And I did a video about a year ago about how to design a body starting with, heavy paper or cardboard and a center line and all that. I'll try and link that video to this one in case you're interested in hooking the two together. Um, the question comes down to um, how much time and effort and materials, or even money, I guess, do you want to invest in making tooling for a guitar when you may build only one uh, and never build another one? This guitar is an experiment for me. I've never built this body, and I have a specific goal in mind, and I'll get to that a little bit later. So whether or not I want to invest in all of the tooling for this that's a big question. So I thought what I'd do is this. I'm going to go back to kind of the way I started building in the first place. And I thought, maybe I could show folks how I go about building an adjustable outside mold. This is not something I invented, not a new idea at all. Um, but it's something that I used to do in the past and for some reason moved away from. But I think now I'm going to revisit this because I'm going to do just one of these guitars. And if it turns out to be successful, then I may proceed with outside molds, bending patterns, and all of the various doodads that go along with repeating this over and over again. Uh, so I did take the time after I made my paper pattern. I do want a more durable pattern, and this is minimal investment in material. This was a scrap, a 1/4 inch plywood. You could just stick with cardboard, I guess. You could use masonite. You could use a piece of acrylic. Whatever you got that is going to give you a reasonably durable edge will do the trick. And obviously, I traced my paper pattern onto the uh, onto the plywood, cut it out carefully with a bandsaw, and you can hand sand it. I happen to have an oscillating spindle sander and so on, so I can do this a little more quickly. But with judicious work with hand tools, you could do this just as well as anybody else can do it, regardless of their equipment. So I started with a piece of 3/4 inch plywood. This is very old plywood, by the way. It's left over from a local church that was built back in the 60s near here. It's happens to be lumber core, oak veneer, white oak at that. Uh, Not that any of that matters, but I wanted something that was pretty good flat stuff to start with. This is what I happen to have around. Uh, it's just scrap material, and I'm pretty tight when it comes to buying plywood these days because it's gotten to be so expensive, and I'm sure many of you know that. And if you don't mind my saying so, pardon my expression, but most plywood these days is feces of the dog. So if you've got any decent plywood around, use it judiciously, I guess. Um, at any rate, sorry for the pontification. I started with a piece of plywood that was 4.5 to 5 inches wider than the guitar will be, and 4.5 to 5 inches longer than the guitar will be. And I placed a center line on it, and then of course from there uh, I set my pattern on there and I traced my pattern. All that's simple enough, right? Anybody can do that. From there, I hope you can see these lines. Might be hard to see them on camera, but you can see I have several lines drawn away from the body at different locations. Uh, those are lines where I'm going to make some cuts, and I'm going to put blocks like this in there. They're going to slide. Excuse me. They're going to slide right into those openings and sit there and become essentially a partial guide for the rim. This is where the expense is going to come in because these carriage bolts are not cheap anymore either. Um, at any rate, how did I decide how many and where to put them and all of that? Good question. I don't know. Um, I do know this. We want to have a tail block guide down here and a heel block guide up here, because when the rims come together, this is where I'm going to glue the tail block and the heel block inside the instrument. So I'm going to want those, and we're going to want to keep those regions particularly strictly square with a center line. But the rest of these lines around here for these different blocks, I established intuitively. I don't think there's a formula available or any specific engineering consideration that one needs to be aware of. However, my thinking was that it's important to come in here at strategic spots. I did want to reach the narrowest part of the waist. I wanted to reach the outermost parts of the lower bout and the upper bout, of course. Now, I may find as I progress through this, I may have to come back to you and say, well, I didn't cut out one of these or something because there wasn't really room to get them in there. So may have to reconfigure some of these lines in the first place. But what I did was I took an adjustable bevel similar to this, like this or similar, and I decided intuitively, as I mentioned, where I wanted each one of these lines to be, these slots. And I adjusted my bevel. I adjusted my bevel to fit that at the end of the plywood, and I traced that on there. Now, I suppose absolute symmetry isn't really that critical, but it seemed like to be a good idea to me. So from this point out here, or you could do it at this point here, you simply measure that distance from where this line meets maybe to the center line. Happens to be 4 1/16 inches. See if you can kind of get the idea of what I'm talking about here. I'm sure you can see that a little better. And I measure that distance then on the other side and simply take my bevel and come over here and remark that opposite side. And I did that same thing for each one of these marks all the way around. Again, I don't know how clear this is in camera because of the light and the color of this plywood, but I think you may be able to see several of these marks, each one of these. And by the way, you'll see I put an X on one side. That's where it's on the X side of the line that the carriage bolt is going to slide in. So my next step now is to cut those out. Now, I suppose if you wanted to be really, really precise about this, you could rig up some way to slide in there with a router and a, spiral bit, but I'm not going to get that fussy. I'm going to cut in with my bandsaw, and then I'm going to establish a line just over 1/4 of an inch away, 17/64 of an inch maybe, and cut those slots and bring them right up to the edge of the body line. They probably don't need to come to the edge of the body line, but this is not only for this guitar, but we want to make this adjustable so that from here I might be able to make a guitar slightly larger or maybe a smaller parlor body from here. So that way we just get a little more use out of this particular thing. So we'll go over to the bandsaw and we'll cut some of these out. So I'm going to cut these out on my large bandsaw. This is a 17-inch. I have a 14-inch across the shop. But I'm doing it on the large bandsaw for one reason only, just because the table is larger and I got a little bit more surface area to keep that plywood on. So let's cut a few of these out and see if we can get some good results. Do remember that backing out of a cut with a bandsaw is not always a brilliant thing to do, but what's on my side is the wider blade and the shorter cut. Well, I've cut out one side of each of these slots, as you can see here. However, this may happen to you, so I'm bringing it up. I ran into a problem here. I couldn't cut this slot um, because the opposite corner of the piece of plywood hit the throat of my bandsaw, and I just couldn't reach in. So I just squared across the end, excuse me, across the edge of the piece, drew the line at the same angle. Sorry, can you see that? Drew that line at the same angle with my bevel and another line parallel to it, 1/4 of an inch away, measuring in right there to that point where the rim will be the edge of the body. No, no problem. I'm sure a lot of you would have thought of that long before I did. Um, but I made each one of these cuts, and now I need to get a cut 1/4 of an inch away from it. You could measure that out, I suppose, in any number of ways you want. You could use your bevel to reestablish. I just took a machinist parallel, 1/4 inch thick, and I laid it on there and went around and traced each one. Very simple, quick and easy. And now I'm going to go cut these all out. Well, I've moved ahead quite a ways with this, mostly because I don't think it's fair to expect you to watch me make cuts with band saws and drill holes and things. But I will explain what I've done here in some detail. Um, After I got this thing cut out and cut these slots in it, I have, of course, traced the body outline on here. And I did that, of course, in accordance with a strict center line. So each one of these cuts was made, and I believe I have enough of them. Your experience, if you do this, you may find that you need fewer or are comfortable with fewer, or maybe you need more. But I think I've got what I need here. So I have made these blocks that you can see here, and I've bolted several of those in place, and I'm going to show you some of the particulars about that. I'm going to start here with the tail block, and over here the heel block. Now, I did these with a piece of hardwood that I can bolt through, and then I made this upright out of 1/4 inch aluminum. That is not necessary at all. I did that because I didn't feel that I had enough space between the body line and the end of my piece of plywood. So I wanted to save some space by thinning out this upright section. If you did this, you could do this in a couple of 3/4 inch pieces of hardwood. Just give yourself a little bit more room at each end. So that's the only reason for that. What I did do, however, was when I bolted these down, these are done with common carriage bolts, 1/4 20 in fact. I did these with carriage bolts, and I bolted those down in such a way, excuse my movement here for a second, I bolted those down so that I was at perfect right angles to my center line. That's really important. These in particular, the tail block and the heel block, you want those strictly square with your center line. Having done that, then I placed my body template in here, and I'm going to turn the camera around and show you that in particular. So to start positioning these blocks, I took my body template, my half template, and I very carefully aligned that with my center line. And then I bolted the heel block and tail block pieces up tight to it. That had to be the first thing that I wanted to get done, because that's going to control movement back and forth. I then took the time to reach in with whatever clamps I have. I just reached in and clamped that into position so that once I have it, I can't move it. Now, I could put these edge pieces on, I suppose, with just by coming up to the body line, but I felt a little more secure about doing it this way. I suppose you could just go with the center line. But then, as you can see, I bolted each one of these stops, guides, so to speak, right up to the edge of the body template. And I use 1/4 20 carriage bolts, as I mentioned before. I was using wing nuts originally, and I switched away from those and went to conventional 1/4 20 nuts, because the wing nuts, you can get them pretty tight, but you can move these by accident. So I went with a more secure system. And if you happen to have one of these ratcheting box end wrenches, they really are handy for this purpose. You can reach up in there and tighten those or loosen them up, whatever you have to do, without a whole lot of fuss. So now um, there's a basic explanation of how I place this, but I want to talk a little bit about making these individual blocks. Before I get into the particulars about these blocks, I want to flip this thing over and show you that I put these cleats underneath it. These are screwed in from the opposite side here, and I did that to raise this up off the bench so that I have clearance for these bolts and different things. And I anticipate as I'm using this, I'm going to want clearance underneath, maybe to get some clamps or other things underneath there. That's the only reason for that. And this will also, if you're using a single layer of plywood, for example, um, this will also help you stiffen that. And if there's any little variation in the shape of the plywood, this will help straighten it down for you. That might be a little helpful. So onto these blocks. I don't recall the exact size of these. I'm going to grab a scale here. I don't think size matters all that much. These happen to be 2¼ inches wide. Uh, Depth, of course, is more important. Uh, the longer you make the blocks, it implies the deeper the guitar rim is going to be. So you'll want to judge that based on the guitar you're making. This is going to be a pretty shallow guitar. So these things, I've only made these 3¼ inches long. Now, the depth from front to back, these happen to be 2¼ sorry, the thickness of this is 1 3/8, 1 5/8. I don't suppose the front to back distance matters too much. However, it's been my experience that the narrower you make these, the more easily they can tend to come out a square. So that's a small consideration. But you can shim these up as you need to when you install them, if you need to. All I did was found a point where I want to drill these. I chose center or pretty close to it, and I jigged up my drill press so that I could slam them in there and drill through each one of them in the same position and go nice and straight down through, you know, square with the bench surface, so to speak. And then I just put a 1/4 bolt through there. I drilled a 17/64 hole just so that that 1/4 would glide through there, and then just tap that down to get it tightened in just a little bit. Washers are necessary, and of course the nut on the bottom, and there you go. So it's a matter of just installing that, and as I mentioned, I clamped in my half pattern, and I bring each one of those guide pieces right up close to it and then tighten it in. And of course, you know, might have to fudge factor these or play around with them a little bit, but that's all right. So it's just a matter of tightening those down. And I also found that in past times I have sanded these to a convexity here, and that really doesn't seem to pay off. You don't really need to, except right here in the waist area. Here I did take the time to take this over to my sander. You could also do this with a hand plane or by whatever means you happen to have, but it's important, I think, to get something that fits into that waist reasonably well. And you can change that, you know, by rotating it, and you can tweak it until you get it just the way you want it. So there's nothing too difficult about this. It's just a matter of, I found that getting your blocks the right height and making sure that your half pattern is down on this thing where it belongs each time, so that when you bring your guides up to it, they match side to side. So I'm just going to go around and I'm going to reclamp this into position and finish these up, and we'll be just about done at that rate. So there's the completed tool. I've got a rim pressed in here, and I mean pressed. This rim was not bent for this at all, so it doesn't really fit. I really got it jammed in with the clamps. But just to demonstrate, you can clamp your rim in, you can hold it steady, you can get center measurements and so on. And when it's completed, you could use this to glue in your tail blocks and heel blocks. Use it the same way you would any outside mold, I guess. And these blocks, these can be as generic or as position specific or use specific, I guess, as you want them to be. So it's certainly nothing difficult to make. If you're a beginning guitar maker, this might be something very helpful for you, because you can make several different bodies just on one device like this without a lot of expense and a lot of effort in making individual body molds. So, and if you are an experienced builder, I guess, this is a way to do an experiment. That's what this is for me. In fact, I'm going to grab this and show you. Right over here. This is a top for something that I have not done before. My aim here is a very small body. This is going to be braced very lightly. The top is very thin. This is going to be a 23 3/4 inch scale guitar, fully intended to have very little tension on it. Full tension on this at concert pitch is only going to be 129 pounds. And I want to see what that does. I want to see if that makes the guitar unusually playable. And obviously we're going to give up a little bit of volume and that sort of thing, but see if we can maintain the shimmer and the sonority that I'm looking for while working at very low tension. Something easy for maybe those arthritic fingers to play. So anyway, there you have it. Thanks a lot for watching this. Put a like on it if you would, please. If you have never seen me before, watch more of my videos and subscribe to my channel if you will. I appreciate your watching. This is Kevin Ledoux, the Pragmatic Luthier, on a blustery winter kind of day here in central New York. Thanks again for watching.